What happened to the people who died before Christ died? Did they go to hell without having their sins covered by the blood of Christ?
Why are musical instruments used as either symbolic or directly implying an idea in John's revelation?
Is it wrong to take communion more than once on the first day of the week?
Why is it okay?
Or can you
Is
take
there
it
a
with your
scriptural
brothers and
pattern
sisters during
for the
morning
removal
service,
of
and
an
also
elder
take it
for
again with
whatever
brothers
reason?
and sisters?
Is it ever right to use man-made
Is it
images
open
of
or
Christ
public
on
apology
bulletins
to
and
one
glass
person in
materials?
front of the church
How about a
biblically?
scratch figure?
Welcome to GBN Live. I'm Mike Hixson. With me tonight, Mark Teske. Mark is the program director for GBN. And Mark, it's good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Mike.
And also Gary Colley. Brother Colley is the preacher for the Get Well Church of Christ here in Memphis. And Brother Colley, great to have you.
Thank you, Brother Mike. Good to be with you.
Well, we're glad that you're a part of our viewing audience tonight. We're going to be talking about the Christian and voting. And really, we want to just ask the question, what about a Christian voting? Would God be pleased with us voting or not voting? And so we're going to be dealing with that in our study tonight. And we want to encourage you to take a Bible and study along with us as we go to the Scriptures to find out what God would have us to do as we think about this great theme. Let's just begin, gentlemen, by, I guess, asking the question, is a Christian obligated to vote?
My estimation, he certainly is, because a Christian, though he's not in the world, he's not of the world, but he has to uphold that which is right in the sight of God. And whether we obey God or not, you know, in Acts 4 and Acts 5, the apostles said, you'll have to judge that, but we believe it's right to obey God.
That's right, that's right. You know, I think it's interesting that if you look at the Scriptures, there are three divine institutions spoken of. The first, of course, being the home. The second would be the civil government. And the third, the church. And so it's hard for me to imagine that God would design the civil government for our benefit and protection and then have us to stay out of that government. Mark, what do you think?
Well, when I look at 1 Timothy 2:2, there we're told specifically to pray for all men and to pray for those who are in authority. That would be the government. And implied in that, praying for that, praying that we can live a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. That requires upon us to not only pray for that, but to do in action that which backs up our prayers. You know, we're in a very unique situation here in our country that we have the ability to vote, to have an influence on who is in control in government. That's fairly unique throughout history, yet we have that opportunity and we can influence the direction of our country. That's definitely something that we should take advantage of.
Well, you know, Jesus talked about how we are to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world.
That's right.
And I believe that the Lord would have us to use whatever influence we have and to use it to our maximum ability.
Absolutely.
And I go back to the Old Testament and look at the life of Joseph. And Joseph was a very unique individual. Mm-hmm. And he had the opportunity to make a profound difference or impact on the Egyptian people. As a matter of fact, in Exodus chapter 1, the Bible tells us that there arose a new king in Egypt that knew not Joseph. And really I think what the text is saying is that this new king did not know the God of Joseph. But when Joseph was in command and living in Egypt, let me tell you what, he made a profound difference.
Yes, he did. Esther also made a profound difference. In fact, she was asked, no, don't you know that you may have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
That's right.
And God approved her.
Daniel, he had influence on two nations.
That's right. That's right.
The Babylonian Empire, and then when the Medo-Persians came in, he had influence once again. Was able to do great work.
Yeah, I think about our country today, and let's just think maybe for a minute or two about our founding fathers, the men and women that were responsible for the framework of the country that we now live in. Did they believe in the God of the Bible?
Absolutely, they did. In fact, when you go to Washington, D.C., it's on every corner. It's at the Supreme Court. It's on the top of the Washington Monument. It's everywhere you look. They believe that there was a God in heaven and that this nation should be ruled by Christian people. That's right.
I guess my question would be, so why is there such a rush on the part of many people to expunge God and Scripture from our government?
I think the answer to that comes in the fact that when you have when you recognize a king, our king is Jesus. That requires that there be a law, and where there's law, there is expectations. There are things you must do, and people don't like anybody to tell them what to do. And today in politics, there is a very strong push for a keep your hands off of me, allow me to do whatever it is I choose to do type of approach. And it's gaining popularity politically because people don't want even the government telling them what they can and can't do.
Well, we talk about the traction that is being gained by what I would call the liberal left.
Right.
And the agenda is to force God out of government, out of our schools, and really, if anything, we have become, in many, many respects, the whipping post of the world. And I think that, the Lord would have us to stand up and to speak out. We have a voice, and under the Constitution in which we live, we have certain rights. And we need to use those rights and I think let people know, look, this is what we believe.
If we don't use those rights, we will degenerate into the devil's kingdom instead of the Lord's. That's right.
That's right. We have a caller that we want to take at this time. We want to pick that up right now. Hello, Rick?
Yes.
Yes, good to have you on GBN tonight.
Oh, good evening. This is Rick from Olive Branch.
Yes, sir.
And I've got a question.
Okay.
Sometimes as a voter, when we are choosing between candidates, we have no candidate that really represents the Christian values that we stand for and that we should support as Christians. And I've been faced with that personally before, and I felt that, it's a choice between the lesser of two evils. How do we deal with that when we're Christians?
I think that's a great question. And as a matter of fact, we were talking about that just a few moments ago. Brother Colley, how do you think, as a Christian, we ought to view this situation?
Well, it's indeed our only chance to see that things are better, and we'll not find anybody who's perfect. There's no perfect man on the earth.
That's right.
But we have men who are at least upholding some of the things, the principles of truth, and those are the ones that we ought to choose and select.
I think that's right.
And I think there's another side to that as well. If we're stuck with the choice of the lesser of two evils and evil one and evil two, the question is, why are good men not running for office? Yes. And I think therein is part of the problem.
Well, and I think that we need to encourage. We need to encourage people, young people, as well as those who are maturing in life, to seek political office. Now, I understand that in many respects, politics has been tainted, but we need good men and women who will stand up and really be a voice.
Absolutely.
For those of us who believe in the Scriptures and believe, for example, abortion. Mm-hmm. I don't want to support anyone in political office who believes in abortion.
I couldn't, with clear conscience, do that at all, because, as Rick has said, sometimes we have to make a choice.
That's right.
And we appreciate his thought along that line.
That's right. Rick, thank you so much for your question tonight. We appreciate so much you tuning in to our broadcast, and thank you again.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Going back to abortion, that has become a political hot button. And I know a couple of weeks ago we were talking about abortion, and it was said that in Shelby County alone, there are 24 abortions that take place every day. Now,
that's horrible.
In Proverbs chapter 6, the Bible says that there are 7 things that God hates. One of those, hands that shed innocent blood. I would hate to think that I was involved in a practice that God absolutely hates or detests.
Well, it's a fearful thing, to fall into the hands of the living God. And if we have done that, we certainly will. We will answer to Him. Since Roe versus Wade came into being in 1973, up to 2008, there was 50 million illegal abortions.
Unbelievable.
Well, sad to think about that, of children that may have found the answer to Ebola. We might have found those doctors that knew how to treat that. but they've already taken their lives away from them.
Well, you know, they want to talk about, many times people talk about the rights of a woman. And I understand, you know, everyone has rights. But I think another question that needs to be asked, what about the rights of that child?
That's more
Does
important.
that child have the right to life?
Absolutely. And one thing that was shocking to me today, a poll was taken of college-age students and asked them about post-birth abortion. And there was a significant number that saw nothing wrong with post-birth abortion, which is killing a baby after it's been born.
Oh, my.
And to be honest with you, there's really not much difference between being born while in the womb or being born the next hour after they're out of the womb. But that's a horrible trend. When you start saying that that's not a life, you run into some pretty horrible territory.
Well, you know, I think we need to point out in the Scriptures, in Luke chapters 1 and 2, Luke speaks of the baby, the infant John the Baptist, in the womb of his mother. In Luke chapter 2, in chapter 2, verse 12, Luke identifies Jesus as the baby.
That's right.
And the same term is used to describe the baby in the womb and out of the womb.
Correct.
Which suggests that God deems that a human life.
It's a child either way you look at it. And you know, the safest place in the world a child ought to have is in the womb, but it becomes the tomb, and that's so sad.
Sadly so. And I think one of the things that we're touching on here, kind of inherently, I'd like to just say objectively and explicitly, is that when we look at the lesser of two evils, as Rick mentioned in the call, we need to look at, does God really care about this?
Right.
You know, when it comes to shedding innocent blood, without a doubt, God cares about it. Now, does God really care if the tax rate's 16% or 19%? You know, is that really of substance to the Christian? You know, I've got my opinions about that, and I'm sure everybody else does as well. But in separating good from evil, you know, the tax rate becomes a secondary consideration to, you know, does God care about the issue? And that's where we need to be focused.
I think we need to understand what's pressing or what's really important, as opposed to, as you say, to what's not. Now, you know, granted, all of us are concerned about the economic state of our country, and rightly so. We ought to be. And we're in a mess because we have politicians that have not handled our money as they would their own money. And so we're knee-deep in debt. But, you know, you talk about a human life. My understanding of Scripture is that human life is deemed as very important in the eyes of God. We talk about the sanctity of human life. Look, God gave that soul
That's right.
A life.
And he says, you know, we're made in the image of God. And then in Genesis 9:6, he said, whoso taketh a man's life, he'll pay with his own blood.
That's right. You know, the psalmist said we've been fearfully and wonderfully made.
That's right.
And we've been made in the image and the likeness of God. And it could be the case that in our country, because we have embraced evolutionism and the idea that we're the products of the Big Bang or something, that we don't value human life.
No, we don't. In fact, it's strange to me that men get more upset over the killing of a dog or a gorilla or a cat than they do about a human baby.
That's right.
That's strange,
That's right.
isn't it?
We've got a caller on the line. We want to take that call now at this time.
We lost them.
I think we just lost our caller.
Oh.
We do have a question, though, that has come in, and we want to take that question. Is there anything that shows that our increased presence in politics is changing anything? Great question.
Yeah, and interesting, in Glasgow, Kentucky, a place where I preached several years ago, back before I even got there, there was a wet, dry vote there in that community, and churches and congregations throughout the religious spectrum came out and worked together to defeat that and kept alcohol out of the community.
That's right.
The sad thing is the laws changed in the state of Kentucky and got very, very specific, and they could, as long as you had one district in the city that voted for alcohol, then they could serve alcohol within that district. So through legislative action, they kind of came and overrode the will of the people as a whole.
Sure.
Right.
But it was very effective in there for a while. And to tell you the truth, as a father, my kids learning how to drive, the fact that there were people who were out drinking were not in that county sure made me sleep a whole lot better at night.
Absolutely.
Right.
You know, many of us have heard the sentiments, you know, all that's necessary for evil to triumph
That's right.
is for good people to do nothing.
That's right.
And I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit, Brother Colley, about just, you know, sometimes we take a passive attitude when really we ought to be aggressive.
Well, it's certainly true, and if we aren't aggressive, then the devil's going to take over all of it. And to deny that there is a God, or deny that the Bible is the Word of God, is that which is not going to help us. It's going to hinder us. It's going to cause us great problems.
That's right. Yeah, you know, we talk about, you know, the presence of certain people. We mentioned Joseph and Esther. I think about Daniel, as you mentioned a moment ago, Isaiah the prophet, identified as the statesman prophet. These people had a profound impact on the lives of people. And, you know, Paul said, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. And I think that we can be kind, and we can be loving in our declaration of truth. But we have to stand up for truth as we see it as revealed in Scripture.
That's right.
Without a doubt. And if the Christians, honestly, if the Christians pull out of the political process completely, if we're not running for office, if we're not voting, that leaves those who are not trying to follow God as the only ones who are leading the country. You know, and again, go back to 1 Timothy 2:2, where our prayers, we're praying for the leadership of our country, and then when we have a say in that, do we back up and say, oh, I can't do anything about it?
Well, you know, think about our country right now. We talk about some of the problems that we have in Washington and how that is impacting us. Here's the bottom line. If we're unhappy with the people who are serving in our district, in our community, in our nation, the only way to get them out of office is to vote them out.
That's right.
And really, it might be the case that what we need is a purging.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And I think that many people in America are opening their eyes to that fact. And I believe that Christians especially need to stand up and be counted. If we stood together, we could move this thing back to where it belongs and maybe turn our nation back to God.
You know, another question that has come in that we want to take, how can we ever stand up for what's right, and the example given is abortion, if we don't vote? I think that's a great question.
It certainly is.
Especially right now, you know, just this coming Tuesday in the state of Tennessee, that Amendment 1, the abortion amendment to the state constitution, that's a chance for people in Tennessee to directly impact the situation with abortion. And I saw a television commercial the other day that had people who claimed to be preachers who were advocating that this constitutional amendment be defeated, that abortion should be freely practiced throughout the state of Tennessee, which is tragic.
It is.
That anybody who would in one way claim allegiance to Christ would then advocate the shedding of innocent blood. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. Romans 13:9 says, thou shalt not kill. And Romans 13 gives the fact that God ordained and ordered that we have laws by which to live, and those laws ought to uphold the dignity of every individual, born or unborn.
That's right. I think that if you were to just probably take a poll of the average American, there are a lot of things that are being propagated by way of the media. That, you know, from the media's perspective, it's as if the American public as a whole believes certain things that they bought in. But you know, the bottom line is, I think that there are a lot of folks out here that when they start looking at the issues, abortion, homosexuality, some of the other things that are going on in our country, the bottom line is they're against those things.
I believe they are.
And yet, you know, in Houston, we talk about the things that were going on in Houston. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. And the fact that, you know, here are subpoenas being given to preachers regarding any kind of data, any kind of information that they've collected regarding homosexuality.
And that whole law and that situation in Houston, that was all, and the mayor, by the way, rescinded that today. She pulled back on that. But the whole situation there, you know, they're trying to say this is our rights. If you don't allow us to do this, you're trampling our rights. But what about the rights of the children.
Yes.
You know, does a little girl have any rights next to a pedophile who may choose to use that same bathroom that she's in?
That's right.
You know, society has an obligation to protect people, granted, but we've got a situation here where, okay, we've got these people who've chosen to engage in pedophilic behavior, and then we've got the you know, the young children who need to be protected.
Correct.
And so a choice has to be made here. Who needs the protection? And the way the city of Houston is saying, well, obviously the pedophiles do. And when you talk to average everyday people, and that's the whole situation there, is the mayor's trying to say, oh, well, we don't care what the people think. We don't care what they say. We don't care about these petitions. We're going to do what we want anyways.
Well, you're right. And I think that, you know, there are a lot of folks that are looking at that situation in Houston, and they're scratching their heads. And what we need to understand is it is an infringement.
It is.
Upon our rights.
It is.
And if we don't stand up for our rights,
we won't have them.
That's exactly right. That's right.
They'll be
and
gone.
So they will be gone.
That is true.
Let's just very quickly ask this question, because I know that there are a lot of people that are concerned about the political landscape today. As a Christian, what kind of candidate should we be looking for?
What kind of candidate should we be looking for? We should be looking for one who is focused on the things that God's focused on, who cares about the things that God cares about. And that should be the number one consideration. Too oftentimes Christians, and I've heard a lot of people try to argue this in the past, well, you know, I may be a Christian, but I'm this political party or that political party, and my Christianity stops when I walk into the voting booth. Well, you know, Jesus had a word for that he used. That was a hypocrite.
That's right.
We're either a Christian or we're not a Christian. If we're going to be a Christian, we need to be a Christian 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether we're in a work at the church building or in a voting booth.
Well, that's right. I don't see how you can dissect Christianity and religion. I mean, they want to try to somehow separate it, but the bottom line is, you know, we live in the world.
That's right.
And I understand we're not of the world, but you know what? If I'm going to live in this country, I want to try to make this country a better place to live in.
Certainly, and a better place for our children, a better place for our families. All of this comes under that thought that you've just expressed. And we need to vote, indeed, the right way, for the right people, to do the right thing. That's right.
That's so true, so true. We do have a follow-up question, and I think the caller, okay, I think Linda is on line one now. Linda?
Hello?
Hello, Linda?
Yes.
Yes. Glad to take your call.
Okay. I was wondering if people are born a homosexual, and if they are or are not, can you give biblical answers to it?
Okay, okay.
This has been a question somebody's been approaching me with, and so
okay.
I wanted something to back it up.
I understand. Thank you very much for that call and question, and we'll do our best to answer it.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
And in Romans chapter 1, a good New Testament passage that deals with this subject, in talking about the origin of homosexuality, you know, it starts with a belief about God that He doesn't exist, and then that's starting about verse 18 of Romans chapter 1, verse 26. For this reason, this lack of belief in God, God gave them up to vile passions. For even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burn their lust one for another. Men with men committing what is shameful, receiving themselves the penalty of the error which was due. That's the origin of it. It's not that God made them that way. He gave them up. He allowed them to go the direction they went in. But regardless of where it came from, every single one of us has to restrain our physical selves. Whether you're homosexual or heterosexual and your desires are that way, just because my desires for a woman does not mean that any woman other than my wife is an acceptable object, and I have to assert control.
Well, homosexuality falls under fornication.
That's correct, and is condemned in every category of sins in the Bible. In fact, the Corinthians, were guilty of those things. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11, Paul said, "Such were some of you, but ye were washed, but ye were sanctified, but ye were justified in the name of Christ." And so that's how we come out of that. These people did, and we can too.
Paul in Romans chapter 11 said, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God." And I think the wisdom and knowledge of God is reflected in His creation of the woman for the man. You remember in Genesis chapter 2, God said it's not good for the man to be alone. Right. And Jesus went back to that in Matthew chapter 19 and said, "Have you not read that He which made them at the beginning made them male and female?" And I think what Moses is saying in Genesis chapter 2, what Jesus is saying is that the woman is the perfect complement to the man.
In 1 Corinthians 7, 2, he said, "Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and every woman have her own husband."
That's right. We've got another caller on the line. Joe from Wisconsin's calling in tonight. Joe, good to have you on the program.
Yes. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
And I appreciate the subject matter that you're sharing with us today. My question is, as a Christian and going to the polls to vote, and you have two candidates, one is a practicing homosexual who says that they have a right to, or they have a desire to want to do what's best for the people of the state. And then you have someone who is already in office who may not be practicing homosexuality, but they have pretty much devastated the state from an economic standpoint. Mm-hmm. My question is, in this situation, which way do you vote? That's my concern. Okay, and I'll hang up and listen to you. Okay. Thank you again.
Hey, thank you, Joe, for your call. Mm-hmm. And good question. Good question. How do you respond to that, guys?
I would go back to that statement we talked about earlier, getting down to the essence of it. What does God really care about? And to be honest with you, economic prosperity comes from God, and it can be taken by God.
Sure. That's right.
So, it would be nice if politicians had more control over it, because I promise you, every politician would want economic prosperity.
I think so.
We tend, whoever's in power tends to get the blame or the credit, oftentimes unrightfully so. But breaking down the issues, what does God care about? And as a Christian, that's where we need to place our focus, the issues that God's concerned with.
I think you're right, Brother Colley.
I think that's absolutely true. And if we do not look closely at these candidates, then we will not vote correctly and may encourage the wrong.
I think what we're saying is that from a moral perspective, that ought to be our first allegiance. And then, we ought to press for economic responsibility.
Sure.
And I would grant that our lawmakers have not been held accountable for the economic irresponsibility that has taken place. I mean, to think about our nation and the fact that we are upside down in debt, we ought to hold them accountable for that.
Absolutely.
But again, it all comes back to us. We're the ones that go into the voters' booth, and we're the ones that pull the lever.
To be the light of the world, we're going to have to live that way.
That's right.
And salt, if it's nowhere near the food, it can't season a thing. So we have to be a part of that process to have an influence on the world.
When you think about Jesus, Jesus was only on earth for about 33 years or so, and yet He had a tremendous impact in the lives of so many people. He continues to influence people.
Oh, yes.
And I want to believe that we as individual people can be an influence for good in this world. As Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And then in verse 16 He said, let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of our program tonight. And thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you again next Thursday night. Until then, God bless.